If you could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say?
Fuck off.
The question is actually an interesting one because speaking directly, she has an opportunity to say anything to the most impressive man of all time. And yet the radical left-wing degenerate feminine psyche requires her to take the antithetical position, which is to reject accountability, reject the potential of a better future, reject progress, reject reciprocity and dialogue, and instead to, well, really betray her position, which is one of feigned virtue as a result of being a victim. Really what she's doing here is just exposing herself as an immoral fraud who is petty and too concerned with the optics of her position rather than serving the American people, as at this point it is abundantly clear that the government is abusing Americans by wasting their tax dollars, and their tax dollars are objectively being wasted at this point. Any person that denies that is on the same losing battle as anyone who says that men should be able to compete against women in sports.
We have a sworn duty to this nation to resist oligarchy, including...
It's always the low IQ degenerate female psyche that inverts reality and can't stand the will of the American people. It's so interesting how that happens. So yesterday I showed you guys a video of the most competent, powerful man on the planet telling a woman to be quiet because she was being degenerately feminine. And today, there's another example of that which I think ties into understanding why the left is in such undeniable shambles now and why they're headed at this point only by disjointed, chaotic, laughable outbursts by incompetent women. This is a really cool video. It happened a couple days ago and I didn't cover it, but I think I didn't understand until now why this is so important. Donald Trump assembled 50 governors, all governors of all 50 states in front of him, and delivered a speech that was to the populace, but now I understand it was actually to these 50 governors. He literally had all 50 governors in a room, and he was telling them things like, you will not let women compete against men in sports, you will not let men compete against women in sports, or your states will lose funding. Now, there was multiple points during delivery that received a standing ovation. But there was one point when he said men will not compete against women in sports, and one of the governors, who happened to be a degenerate female, did not go along with it. And so he made an example out of her, much like he made an example of the other degenerate female who was scoffing in the face of objective accountability and the will of the American people, the will of the nation, as well as, of course, competent masculinity, which is now presiding over every facet of the government and realistically the culture.
I signed an executive order banning men from playing in women's sports, but I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
So, interestingly, the governor of Maine is in the corner of the room, kind of like the state of Maine is in the corner of the country.
Are you not going to comply with it?
He asks her directly in front of all the other governors. This is really interesting.
Complying with state and federal laws.
She says she's going to comply with state and federal laws. This is maybe one of the coldest comebacks I've ever heard in politics.
With state and federal laws.
We are the federal law, so you better do it.
He was about to say, I am the federal law, and then he said, we are the federal law.
You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
Maine collapses without federal funding, as do most states.
By the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding. Every state, good, I'll see you.
This woman actually said, I'll see you in court, rather than acknowledging that men shouldn't compete against women. By the way, the vast, and I mean super majority of people, do not think that men should compete against women in sports because it's heinous, it's grotesque, it's disgusting. Forcing women to play against men in sports is abusing women. So the left is openly trying to abuse women in the name of compassion and inclusivity. It's thoroughly twisted, but that's the brand of the left, and that's why the left is in public shambles now. And you see that the left is in shambles at this point because every single thing coming out of the left is basically wailing, screaming, tantrums about being judged and held accountable as they collapse into the sand, as everyone recognizes this is a battle between those who hate reality and those who embrace objective reality, logic, reason, rationality, etc. And the left is coming on the wrong side of that. We knew that they were on the wrong side of history, but they psychopathically denied that fact because they consider themselves to be above reality, to be above accountability, just as they deny the individual identity. And so they thought they could get away with it. And now that they've been proven wrong, it's not just a shallow defeat. It's a defeat on every level of their ideological substructure and on some level every level of their psyche, because everything they tell themselves, from I'm a good person because I'm a victim to there's no such thing as an individual identity and I'm a part of a group, has been debunked and refuted utterly. This is why their defeat was so resounding. This is why they don't know what to say or do on the internet anymore, because they've been judged. This is another example of that, being judged.
In court, I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
So he literally tells the governor in front of, and understand this is important, in front of every other governor of every state, saying you're not going to be in politics after you lose for saying men should compete against women. This is so much bigger even than men competing against women in sports, because leftists will often say, oh, why do you care about it? They use their perverse inversion and destitution to say, why do you care about trans people? It's really disgusting. Because no, we care about women. We care about protecting women. But the bigger issue at play here actually is that we are forcing them to engage with reality, meaning biology. And just the fact that we're forcing them to engage with reality instead of their ideological cult is enraging to them. The fact that they must adhere to reality instead of their cult. They take this as oppression. We take it as morality. They take it as oppression. We take this as justice. They take this as an affront, and we take this as culling the psychopath.
Want men playing in women's sports, so you better comply, because
now the degenerate female psyche is uniquely positioned in its hatred of reality because it inverts truth, which is an interesting relationship to reality. It's the same relationship to virtue that Satan has archetypally in all religions, as a matter of fact, because Satan perverts and he inverts, meaning that evil can't create anything. It can only take the opposite position of what's good. And in this way, you see degenerate women slandering the most impressive men of Earth. Check this out. The lowest of low IQ, the ghettoest of all ghetto, Jasmine Crocket, when asked about the most competent, rich, genius man who has accomplished more than any other person for all of human history, and who holds the support of the majority of the nation, says this.
If you could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say?
Fuck off.
The question is actually an interesting one, because speaking directly, she has an opportunity to say anything to the most impressive man of all time. And yet the radical left-wing degenerate feminine psyche requires her to take the antithetical position, which is to reject accountability, reject the potential of a better future, reject progress, reject reciprocity and dialogue, and instead to, well, really betray her position, which is one of feigned virtue as a result of being a victim. Really what she's doing here is just exposing herself as an immoral fraud who is petty and too concerned with the optics of her position rather than serving the American people, as at this point it is abundantly clear that the government is abusing Americans by wasting their tax dollars, and their tax dollars are objectively being wasted at this point. Any person that denies that is on the same losing battle as anyone who says that men should be able to compete against women in sports. But again, this is how broken leftists operate. Their downfall is defined by the degenerate female psyche. Notice how they still can't contend with ideas. They instead think that they're the good, virtuous class after they've been refuted.
To resist kings. We have an obligation.
The left is the only one that actually believes in unchecked power, because they only believe in power. They don't believe in meritocracy. They don't believe in someone rising to a position of influence as a result of their competence, much less the will of the American people. It's so perverse, because you remember that they inverted that notion when they said that Trump was a threat to democracy. Then democracy selected for him by an overwhelming margin, and they're the ones that only believe in power. Then they're saying that he is somehow a king, which is not elected. In fact, he was elected by the majority of the populace. So they reveal the fact that they're narcissistic because they look down on the people that put him there. They're psychopathic beyond belief, because they believe themselves to be superior to you. And they invert truth because they say a king rather than someone who is duly elected by margins that are literally historic. So these are immoral people, and they invert reality, but it is always accompanied by the degenerate female psyche.
To resist oligarchs. We have a sworn duty to this nation to resist oligarchy, including...
It's always the low IQ degenerate female psyche that inverts reality and can't stand the will of the American people. It's so interesting how that happens. If you're watching this video, subscribe and become a member at abrahambier.locals.com, where you can resist communism for less than the price of a coffee. I appreciate you guys.